The Thousand and One Nights, or in some traditions, mostly Western, the Arabian Nights, are a remarkable example of popular literature. They are a collection of stories, a huge compendium of entertaining tales. They're charming in many respects. They're gripping in many respects. They they function primarily on the idea of the cliffhanger, suspense. You want to know what happened. There are these little interruptions that break in and they hold you off as a great showman would. But they're not just entertainment. They are largely indivisible from the growth of Islam. The exact dating of the stories, The Thousand and One Nights, is very uncertain. The history and the context of it is complicated. And it is to this day more popular, probably more universally respected as literature in the in Europe and the United States than in the land where it came from. The Arabic scholars tend to look at this as well. You know, it's sort of silly popular literature, not unlike, I would suppose, maybe a Mexican novella. It's clever, it's entertaining, it's titillating at times, but it's not something that's serious. But you can see within it all of these little undercurrents of Islamic proselytizing, of arranging themes to reinforce, coincidentally or not, but that do in fact reinforce basic principles of the Quran. And I don't want to get too deeply into that, but it's something to bear in mind. The values that get expressed through this work, in just the little casual mentions here and there, the strange coincidences that pop up, do feed into an Islamic reading. But at bottom, it is basically just one heck of a good story. It's not one story, it's many, many, many stories in a master narrative. That technique of having characters in a story start telling stories, and then the stories within those stories the characters within those stories start telling their own stories, with characters who start telling their own stories, and one after the other, leads into this very complicated and ornate chain where everybody is always talking at the same time. You're never quite sure where the reality is anymore. That's called we lit scholars will call that a frame narrative, where they have a setup for somebody to start telling stories and then trip the mechanism. And that what it leads to is this enormously complex nesting of a story and a story and a story, so that you're just a little bewildered by the complex patterns that emerge. It's overwhelming at times to consider, and that's part of the point. But we'll get to that. The best way to start with something like this, quite frankly, since it is so rich, is to just jump in and you start plowing through and reading the stories. And they're very inviting that way. You don't need an awful lot of background. You don't really need to know an awful lot about even the Quran to really enjoy and get a lot out of these things. And it's designed to just get you turning pages, and it's fun, and it can keep you up quite literally night after night after night. Just, hey, well, all right, I'll turn the lights out in another couple of minutes, but yeah, let me just get through this one little bit. And that can drag you in forever and ever and ever. And, well, not quite forever, but close. 1001 is a somewhat arbitrary number, but it's meant to indicate, in this tradition, infinity, an infinite number of nights for stories. But I think we can all agree that whether it's not quite 1001, it goes on for quite a while. Even in the excerpted form, you start after a few pages, like, when is this over? What is going on here? It seems to always, since you're always restarting a new story and then a new story within that and a new one and a new one and a new one, it's dragging you in, and you have no idea. And the pages are flying by, and you have no idea, like, where are we getting? There's no progress. And that can be frustrating for some and kind of enjoyable for the others, because they're always sort of sucker punching you and say, but wait, there's more, and drag you in to yet another little side route. And this goes on for a long time. Like I said, the excerpt that we're working out of in the Norton Anthology is like 150 pages long. No, not even, like 100 pages long. The full collection is, well, this is mine. This is 3 volumes, and it's beefy. Part of this is the provenance of the collection as a whole, and the way it came to be published in the West, originally in France in the 1800s. Somebody got a hold of some of these stories and started publishing them in Paris, and they became all the rage, and they started saying, well, give me more, give me more, give me more, and then people just started adding to them. So it's not necessarily a stable text, as we literary scholars would like to term it. But if you can put that aside and you just deal with what we have, it is quite enjoyable, and it is very accessible. Part of that accessibility is the issue. It is meant to be accessible. It's playing on basic human drives, and it's dealing with human nature in probably its most unadorned forms. You get an awful lot of lust, you get an awful lot of love, you get wonder, you get, above all, I would say, the fuel of curiosity. Human beings are not the only creatures that experience curiosity, but I think we probably take it up a notch. The stories are fueled on this, and it seems to understand that, okay, to reach a large audience, to reach a readership that is very, very broad, you appeal through what we all have in common. And curiosity is that. It brings you into the story, it drags you in, and it makes you almost lust to get to some kind of closure, which, of course, these stories always defer. They'll always say, oh, you crossed this goal line, but actually the goal line is over there. And then we're going to charge over there, and we're going to get there, and it's not going to be there anyway, because there's another thing after that we have to get to, and on and on and on. And this is part of the way it brings you in. It feeds on that popular notion, like, honestly, a Mexican telenovela. It just goes on. No matter how improbable sometimes or how silly sometimes, it will drag you in. And this is one of the mechanisms it uses for its for drawing in readers. A couple other just superficial things. Unlike a lot of the longer works that we've read, this is written in prose, not poetry, so it's already sort of a little bit more common in its demographics. It's trying to speak a common language for people, to reach them on their level. It also deals largely, although it has an awful lot of kings and some very impressive and historical ones, it deals in large part with ordinary people, commoners, people who probably can't read, but they are driven by just ordinary human wants and desires, and you see them and you trace them. And it's not complicated portraits of any of them. That's another thing. It's not particularly nuanced from characterization points of view. And these situations are all fairly dramatic, written in bold colors that is going to appeal to like a, you know, a medieval New York Post reader. It just blasts out your what it has to say. But it's trying to get at something very universal. And to do that, it will speak the language of the common people. So there is great subtlety and great nuance within the folds. But on the surface, it is all candy. But the way it starts is very interesting, and the way it sets up its little frame tale, where you have these two brothers, both kings. So right there, it's a little bit of a different take from the it's all about common people thing, but significantly, their commonality is exactly what is under scrutiny here, because one brother decides, well, you know, I haven't seen my big brother in a long time. I'm going to go visit him. And well, he as he is getting ready to leave town, he has occasion to spot his wife. This is where he gets a little salty and salacious. He spots his wife having a sexual relationship with, on my page 601, sorry, he found his wife lying in the arms of one of the kitchen boys. When he saw them, the world turned dark before his eyes, and shaking his head, he said to himself, I am still here, and this is what she has done when I was barely outside the city. How will it be, and what will happen behind my back when I go to visit my brother in India? No, women are not to be trusted. Again, we see the women question. Women are not to be trusted. This is his reading of the situation. That comes back. But significantly, always watch the details. What is his specific reaction? What is he reacting to? And how is he reacting? In what words is this expressed? So he draws from it immediately. This means women are not to be trusted. Then it writes, he got exceedingly angry, adding, by God, I am king and sovereign in Samarkand, yet my wife has betrayed me and inflicted this on me. Very focused on himself, rightly or wrongly, but this is significant. He is not concerned necessarily about anything else. He's just how this looks for him. He's very personally affronted. He takes it immediately as a blow to his ego. And that is significant because, again, beginnings and endings. This is happening right at the beginning. Everything that happens is very significant. And how somebody reacts to something tells you an awful lot about their character. Then he then left the city, and going to the vizier, ordered that they depart that very hour. The drum was struck. They set out for the journey, while Shahzaman's heart was on fire because of what his wife had done to him, and how, see, again, emphasizing to him, victimization, and how she had betrayed him with some cook, some kitchen boy. That's the second time he has been identified as a kitchen boy. This isn't necessarily even, that distinct a characterization or anything, but it is telling you something, because what is a kitchen boy? A kitchen boy is a servant. So this is suddenly not just an affair, but he seems to be dwelling on that. Well, it's a kitchen boy, as if, well, if she was shacking up with another prince, that would be different. But this, a kitchen boy, very, very derogatory, very haughty in its attitude and its perspective. And you get a sense of a little bit of a class outrage there. Like, what is this? Can't you pick somebody better? There's that undercurrent there. The king, I believe this is still Shahryar. I get the two names mixed up constantly, so I'm going to do that. Yeah, I think this is Shahryar. Yeah. He goes to visit his brother, and he's depressed and he's frustrated. Hold on 1 second. Actually, did I miss something? I think I missed something. Yeah. Well, he killed his wife. That's a little detail too. He took out a sword and hacked up his wife and her kitchen boy lover and tossed her out the window, and that's when he left town. Yeah, well, that's taken care of. Which is, I think, a little funny in the way it's just sort of tossed off as an offhand account. Oh, yeah, and then he did this, like he felt bad. He thought about it for a little while. He made himself a sandwich. He considered his options, and then he just hacked them to bits and tossed them out the window. Those subtle little ways of just making it like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. I think this is instructive because it tells you, again, more about how he is viewing the world. But he goes to visit his brother, and he gets to his brother, and he's sad about this, and he is put up in his brother's compound, his brother's estate, I guess, where he gets a whole palace to himself that is sort of conjoined with or on the same property with the other for the women and members of his household. Very significant. The women of the household, presumably the queen and all her handmaidens, all of the other semi-nobles and servants, are all kept in a separate room from the king, who presumably has the main spread on the grounds. And the conceit of the women, or the woman who is locked up, is something that will be coming back, because again, this is a very small detail, but it is slipped into the very beginning of the story. So this is an important thing, because does it really matter who sleeps where? Unless it matters, and they're telling you so that they can develop it later on, but it might not be explicit right off the bat. The others for the women and members of his household. He gave the guest house to his brother Shahzaman after the attendants had gone to scrub it, dry it, furnish it, and open the windows. Maybe Shahzaman is the one. I don't know. I'm going to get them mixed up. I don't care. Thereafter, Shahzaman spent the whole day at his brother's, returning at night to sleep at the palace, then go back with his brother the next morning. But whenever he found himself alone, he thought of his ordeal with his wife, and he would sigh deeply, then stifle his grief and say, "Alas, that this great misfortune should happen to me, to one in my position." Significant. He's repeating that. He's dwelling on his the affront to his ego. Then he would fret with anxiety, his spirit would sag, and he would say, "None has seen what I have seen." None. He feels almost worse because he is alone in this. He feels No one has suffered as much as he has. There's a heavy dose of victimization in this, but just also the perspective that he is alone in this ordeal. None has seen what I have seen. In his depression, he ate less and less, grew pale, and his health deteriorated. He neglected everything, wasted away, and looked ill. And his brother recognizes this and says, well, come on, let's go kill something. Let's go hunting. We'll have a good time. We'll camp out. We'll kill stuff, and we'll come back, and you'll feel better. He just Shazman, I don't really want to do that. You go. I'm just going to sit around here and mope around. And he does. And Shazman's sitting around moping, feeling lonely, feeling sorry for himself, feeling very, very alone. And after his brother's departure, this again is my page 602, we're just flying through this. After his brother's departure, Shazman stayed in the palace and from the window overlooking the garden watched the birds and trees as he thought of his wife and what she had done to him, victim, and sighed in sorrow, while he agonized over his misfortune, again drilling that down again and again. Gazing at the heavens and turning a distracted eye on the garden, the private gate of his brother's palace opened, and there emerged, strutting like a dark-eyed deer, the lady, his brother's wife. Strutting. You can read that a bunch of different ways, and we don't need to go into it, but it's not a favorable portrait. Strutting like a dark-eyed dear, the lady, his brother's wife, with 20 slave girls, 10 white and 10 black. While Shazman looked at them without being seen, they continued to walk until they stopped below his window. Without looking in his direction, thinking that he had gone on the hunt with his brother, they then sat down, took off their clothes, and suddenly there were 10 slave girls and 10 black slaves dressed as the same clothes as the girls. The rest goes as you know, and we have a amping up of the sexual betrayal theme that we saw in the earlier. Here it's taking on slightly different tones. First of all, it's a full-blown orgy. There are like 10 couples lined up. The slaves are all black. This is significant. The ladies, the 10 slave girls, including the wife, are presumably not black, largely, and so you have class mixing again. Yeah, the queen with these slaves. You have race mixing. You have just sexual depravity. It's a sign of that. Yeah, it's very it's an orgy, and the authors know how to hook an audience. Ooh, sexy stuff. Brings in the audience, it appeals to them, and you're going to perk up the minute you start reading this, because let's face it, when you first pick up this book, it's hard to get through turning all those pages. But if you find an orgy on page 2, your odds of putting it down immediately go down. He watches a little of the orgy. But then it's over. And the slaves all scatter. The girls go back inside. Everybody's dressed again. The slaves also, I should point out, it wasn't just a flip of, well, it was the slaves and the racial commingling and the class commingling, but also that the slave men were dressed as women here. So there's a weird gender inversion that's seen as a perversion thing here. So it is supposed to be unnatural on many, many levels. But he watches it, it ends, everybody scatters off, and Masood himself jumped over the garden wall and disappeared while the slave girls and the ladies sauntered to the private gate, went in, and locking the gate behind them, went their way. Locking the gate behind them. They are locked up regularly. That little detail keeps slipping in there. Like, the girls are always locked up. The women are always kept inside. They have no freedom of movement, and yet they're sneaking out to do this. Gee, I wonder if that could be connected. Sauntered also. It's kind of a nice people walk. Suspicious people saunter. All of this happened under King Shahzaman's eyes when he saw the spectacle of his wife and the women of his brother, the great king, how 10 slaves put on women's clothes. Again, they're drilling down that. They're telling you exactly what is the outrage here. Put on women's clothes and slept with his brother's paramours and concubines, and what Masood did with his brother's wife in his very palace. Again, ego-driven, in his very palace. All about him. All about him. And pondered over this calamity and great misfortune. His care and sorrow left him. And he said to himself, this is our common lot. Even though my brother is king and master of the whole world, he cannot protect what is his, and his wife and his concubines, and suffers misfortune in his very home. What happened to me is little in comparison. He feels better knowing that other people have suffered, that his brother has suffered the same, if not arguably worse. And this is very significant. Misery, it turns out, loves company. He feels better feeling less alone. He starts putting on weight again. He's smiling. He's whistling a happy tune, and as he goes around the palace, his brother comes back from the hunting trip and notices, hey, what's going on? And after a little convincing, one brother brings the other, again, I don't know the names, one brother brings the other to see the spectacle, and they watch it the same as they did before, and it all betrays or plays out the same way again, because now you have a second orgy scene in the span of a couple of pages. And the second brother is just as blown away as as the first brother was when he saw his wife's betrayal. And he comes up with the idea that, we need to go wander and try and find someone, if we should find one whose misfortune is greater than ours, is the phrase on 605. Almost like the old Greek figure of Diogenes searching, through the night looking for one honest man. Just a kind of desperate search for a fellow sufferer in the world, somebody who has suffered more. On the one hand, it's a little selfish again, a little ego-driven, like it's a competition. I want to find someone. But on the other, you can see this yearning for solace. He wants to try and find someone that he can connect to, that understands his pain, understands his suffering, understands the feeling of being lost. And so they start wandering off. We can skip over some of it, but I think it's Shahryar then comes up with his own plan. He goes back to his kingdom, and he comes up with a plan to, he calls in his vizier, his basically chief of staff, his number one assistant, and says, bring me single girls. I'm going to marry them one at a time and sleep with them, and then in the morning kill them, throw them out, and that way I can never be betrayed. He has read his situation in this way. Remember, he said, Women cannot be trusted. So he thinks, well, okay, that's the lesson I should draw from this. Women should not be trusted. And it wasn't anything about a problem in their relationship. It was women can't be trusted. And because he saw it with his wife, he saw it with his brother's wife, this is the conclusion he has drawn. Significantly, however, we have to go back to these women are all locked in. They're all afforded no freedoms, no identity on their own. They don't have names. Characters with names in literature are usually significant. Characters who don't have names and are just the wife, it's a weird way of denying them individuality. So we have this brother, I think it's Shahryar, who comes up with his plan that I'm going to marry one girl at a time. I'm going to sleep with her, rape her. And then in the morning, I'll just send her off and have her killed. I can do that. It's good to be the king. And when he does that, also, it's portrayed in a way that shows a remarkably universal effect for it. Where'd it go? Page 607. Shahryar sat on his throne and ordered his vizier, the father of the two girls, to find him a wife among the prince's daughters, the princes. The vizier found him one, and he slept with her and was done with her. And the next morning he ordered the vizier to put her to death, was done with her. Sexuality comes under some very shaky characterizations. It, was done with her is reminiscent of earlier when with Masood, they talked about when he did his business on her or something like that, and then he had to wash up afterwards. And there's this sense that, well, it's kind of distasteful or ugly. He is. I mean, he's basically ordering girls out of a catalog. He's not even seeing them. He's just saying, well, okay, go bring me a girl. He marries her and then sleeps or rapes her and just has her killed. It's an ugly manifestation of human desire, or an ugly characterization of human desire. But he goes through the prince's daughters, and he puts her to death. That very night, he took one of his army officers' daughters and slept with her. So we went from princes to army officers. Interesting. The vizier, who could not obey him, put her to death. The third night, he took one of the merchant's daughters. Now we're down to merchants. We seem to be sliding down a social scale of princes, army officers, and now we're at merchants who are, middle-class commoners. Slept in, and it became Shahryar's custom to take every night the daughter of a merchant or a commoner. So now he's really gone through all classes of the society, and he is raping and killing his way through all of them, which honestly brings to mind characters like Gilgamesh, who are out of control and whose mental state is not just a personal mental state, but because he is a great king, he has enormous power. And when the king is out of joint, as Shakespeare would put it, then all the world will be out of joint as well. And here you see that things start to get, understandably, the people start to get a little concerned, like, this guy is doing all of this. He continued to do this until all the girls perished, their mothers mourned, and there arose a clamor among the fathers and mothers who called the plague upon his head, complained to the creator of the heavens, and called for help on him who hears and answers prayers. So there is a kind of social unrest, a general outrage. You get the sense that, the entire society, if not the entire universe, is outraged at this behavior. And then comes in Shahrazad. Shahrazad is the daughter of the vizier. She's been mentioned a couple of times, I believe in the first line even. And she is introduced as a very accomplished and learned young woman. She has read all these books. She knows history. She knows poetry. She's given this great resume, and she's a very impressive character. She's very admirable, and she just out of her own selflessness decides she can help. As she puts it on here on 607, I may either succeed in saving the people or perish. She wants her father to marry her to the king. She wants to take that place. She doesn't articulate why just yet. She just wants to help, and she thinks, I can do this. She might have a plan. I assume she has a plan at this point, but she's not really tipping her hand just yet. She just says, I can help, so I'm going to. And there's something quite noble about that, something kind of foolish about that. Because this has been going on for quite a while. The guy has ripped through an awful lot of girls at this point, and it's troubling. And her father, who has been arranging all of these marriages and presumably doing most of the killing, or at least, if he didn't wield the axe, he might be, he's ordering it. And he says, this is insane. Don't do this. And they have a little argument. And it's sort of interesting to see Shahrazad stand up and assert herself. And she is she doesn't just take guff from her father. She won't just back down. No, she has an idea, and she wants to try and help, and she's determined to, and through no selfish interest of her own. Presumably, she is largely exempt from this policy, at least for now, because of her father's position. He can sort of say, oh, yeah, you like my daughter? Well, yeah, but what about that one over there? He has this power. He can do this. She is voluntarily stepping into the line of fire out of a sense of obligation to and connection to the broader society. And that's admirable. But her father's flipping out about it. Now, her father is, you can interpret him a number of different ways. He doesn't come off as the smartest guy in the world, but he gave birth to her, or he propagated her. And so he's probably not dumb, but he's arguing with her, and she's adamant. And he says, well, let me tell you a story. I don't want, let me see, where is that line? It says, daughter, he who misbehaves ends up in trouble. He who considers not the end, the world is not his friend. As the popular saying goes, I would be sitting pretty, but for my curiosity, I am afraid that what happened to the donkey and the ox with the merchant will happen to you. Which is a weird little segue to go to. But, he's arguing with his daughter, and he's just scrambling around and trying to come up with, I'm worried about you'll suffer the same fate as the ox and the merchant and the donkey and whatever. And she asked, Father, what happened to the donkey, the ox, and the merchant? It's very simple. He just drops this almost as he's scrambling around trying to come up with reasons or ways to convince her not to do this. And he just sort of falls into this, oh yeah, somebody told me this story once, and I don't want you to suffer the same fate. And she just says, really, what happened?